Austin, where the Communicators is on location for the 2012 Cable Show. For the next 3 weeks, we'll be bringing you some of the interviews that we conducted on telecommunications policies and issues. This week, Michael Powell, who is President and CEO of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. We talked with him, as well as Glenn Britt, who is Chairman of Time Warner Cable. Here are those interviews. Michael Powell, President and CEO of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. Yet this week at the Cable Show, you had a sit-down interview with FCC Chairman Janikowski. And Chairman Janikowski talked about the fact that shared services agreements needed closer attention. What's your view on that?
Well, he didn't expound upon it in detail, but it's a subject that has come up somewhat consistently in the course of concerns about retransmission consent. And I think it was meant to signal that that's at least one area that the Commission may have some concerns when people are bundling retrans power and leverage through the combination of those shared agreements. There may be something in there from a public policy perspective that concerns them. I assume that that's what he was focused on. But to be candid, I haven't heard much more of it beyond that. So it's interesting that they're focused on it, and we'll see what comes of that in coming days.
Concern for the cable industry?
Certainly for some of my members, it is. This has been a touchy issue, both in the association, because we represent both programmers and operators. But there are certainly operators that are sort of strenuously continue to be concerned about rising programming cost, and particularly in the broadcast space with retransmission consent. And it isn't just what you pay. There are a whole lot of pieces to that, some of which are part of the government policy and regulation that they've had a proceeding at the Commission for a long time. And right or wrong, the Commission should resolve elements of it. If it's not going to do those things or doesn't have the jurisdiction, it should say so and will. And to those things that it thinks it should make a difference in, it should act on those things.
What were some of the other policy issues that came up during this year's Cable Show?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm a policy wonk, but I love when a show really seems focused on the business, the consumer, and the technology, and that policy isn't the biggest part of it. You do start to hear the rumblings about, are we finally at the place where we're going to start talking about a new telecom rewrite in 2013 once we get through the election? I think there's a universal view that certainly the old statute is definitely old now, if not slowly being in need of burying. Though I don't know that everybody's that clear about what exactly should replace it, but that's been a healthy conversation. Privacy has been a healthy conversation. It's not unique to cable. It's not unique to even traditional telecommunications. It's very critical to Facebook's stock price, not once it gets over the mess that it's in. It's critical to sort of where the country's going to draw that balance. That seemed to be a big subject of discussion. Some from the government mentioned the really important conference in Dubai this December with the ITU about global internet policy, which I think is a sleeper area of great worry to the industry and to broadband generally. But otherwise, with those issues on the margin, a little bit of cybersecurity I think has come up, a little bit of piracy has come up, but I would say a little bit, meaning the overwhelming feel of this show is being, wow, a lot of new technology things we've been waiting for are coming to fruition. Wow, the business is doing well. Wow, broadband really is turning into a success story for America. And people seem enthused by that.
What are some of the new technologies that have been introduced to this show or talked about?
Well, let's see, let me just think of two real quick. One involving Comcast is something they call the X1 platform, and I think they announced at the show that Boston's going to be the first city they deploy this technology in. So think about it, we sort of hate our set-top box, right? But yet that set-top box for the entire history of cable has been an integral part of the architecture of the network. But it limits what you can do with the guide, it limits what you can do with software, it limits what you can do with security. It is the gatekeeping device of the network. And Comcast has been a leader in saying we could deliver more services on a cloud platform. The guide doesn't need to sit on your set-top box. It could live on a server in Denver. So could applications, so could other kinds of services. And we can innovate on that because we can fix once and distribute once. So they could literally change the guide overnight. They could change the guide in an hour. They could build an application or work with another company, a Google or someone, and build an application and host it on the server in the cloud, and that platform would be able to allow you to do stuff. And we wouldn't have to switch out your gear every time we did an innovation. And I think ultimately they want to deploy that platform to all the homes in their footprint, so we start having that stop being the limitation on innovation. And all cable companies are headed to some version of that, so that's really exciting. We had Verizon Wireless here. What I'm excited about at this show is we have very non-traditional companies at the show. We have Netflix, we have Google, we have Microsoft, we have Verizon. Verizon chose to announce a platform on the mobile platform that allow them to search and identify and index video, streaming content, or traditional content all over the web and bring that to you or attach you to that content, and they chose to do that here. So those are two of the things that are exciting here, and there's a lot more.
Well, Michael Powell, you mentioned that Verizon was here,
yeah.
And there's some agreement with Comcast that they're working on a joint venture.
Yes.
As a former chairman of the FCC, is that something that you think might attract the attention of regulators?
I think, one, it will attract the attention of regulators because it's bundled with public interest license transfer that will require the government to look at it. So I have every confidence that it will get the screening and the scrutiny that you think anything should. It's not something that's sort of free to escape the view of the commission. Now the companies will argue, probably rightfully so, that some of these things should be outside the purview of the jurisdiction. But I think they are wise to say, look, we're willing to have our conversation about all the stuff at once and get the government's take on it. I tend to always have a gating. My view is some things are interesting to me, some things then raise my eyebrow to say, let's be thoughtful and vigilant about that. But I think you should pause there before you start thinking A, B, and C need to happen or this is bad. Because I think we should always be guided by, is it good for consumers? Is there something consumers are craving that they're not getting? And I think there is one thing consumers are getting that they're not craving, that they're not getting, which is they don't want their wired and wireless broadband networks to be managed as separate platforms all the time. When I take an Apple iPad, I want to walk in my house and I want the Wi-Fi in my house to go over my Comcast broadband network and let me watch HBO Go. When I go outside, I don't want to then have to go to it and say, disconnect, connect to this network, go to 3G. The industry's, people want broadband to be, like the air, ephemeral and everywhere, and I don't have to be a network manager every time I change spaces. So if this venture can help solve that problem, that's a problem consumers would like solved. They should do so in a pro-competitive way. I think the government will ensure that they do, and I think they're conscious of that.
How has the business model of a so-called cable company changed over the past 2-3 years?
Lots of ways. I think the biggest way is broadband. There are certainly cable companies that broadband may be the more significant part of their revenue than the traditional TV video distribution business would be. But the beauty is, when I think about it, I'm not that old. I remember, to me, cable at the FCC was Title VI. It was you sell guys video and they like it, don't like, We're in every form of communication business that exists in the world today. We provide a wired broadband distribution platform. We package and bundle and sell video content. We are one of the nation's largest telephone service providers. We develop software and applications for iPads and iPhones and smartphones. We're in every one of those businesses. So we're cable because our brand says so and that's our legacy, but we are one of the nation's premier communications platform providers, period. Most cable CEOs increasingly conceptualize themselves that way. I am in the platform business. That's why we have a new ad campaign, and it's cable, it's how we connect. Because we are the connective tissue to bring all of that to fruition. And as I said in my speech on Monday, very proud of Facebook's IPO, even though the market's trying to figure it out. But in America, a 28-year-old kid can still in 8 years make $19 billion. But that wouldn't be possible if there wasn't a ubiquitous broadband platform that he can count on and rely on. And so I'm proud of my country, and I'm proud that it's still a place that entrepreneurs make great things come to life.
Well, you mentioned social media, Facebook, et cetera. In the age of social media and connectivity that we have today, what's the importance of a show like this?
I'll go to my grave believing human relationships are still the most important thing that make us different as people. Business is a relationship. Government and private sector form a relationship. Relationships have to be nurtured. I think social network can facilitate that, but if my children's friends were never met, they never met them, they never went and had a Coke with them, they never went to Dairy Queen and had some fun with them, maybe social network helped them organize that activity, maybe it helped them share and extend that activity, but my child will be a sad person if those friendships never did anything but be virtual. When the Egyptians formed in Tahrir Square, having used Facebook, it still took people to come together, united as people, to make change happen. And I think the genius of Zuckerberg and others is they facilitated group-to-group formation, and that's still a people business, and so is the show.
Michael Powell, with states taking over the franchise agreement business, how is that going to affect local content, local access to cable shows?
Yeah, I don't think that it's going to have all that much effect. I mean, I guess the underlying assumption of that question is it's sort of that regulatory approval that somehow forcing companies to do something they would otherwise not be interested in doing. There are a lot of dollars living in hyper-localized communities. Let's go to the web where they're not regulated or franchised. Well, what are the hot products that last you? Groupon, right? Coupons from localized activity. Zipcar, Capital Bike Share, Patch at AOL, hyper-localized content. Google local, localizing search results. Can I, your phone saying, can I identify where you are? Because where you are actually matters than that you exist in the global space. I don't think there's anything but a compelling story to serve the local market. Whether that's news, whether that's advertising, whether that's with shows and content and product. If there's a real need there, I think you'll serve it, and I don't think I care who my franchising authority is if I'm making a decision about whether to program for that market.
I wanted to ask you also, or have you talk about what the cable industry is doing to further expand broadband in the U.S. There's an initiative by the cable industry.
Well, thank you for asking. It's something I think we're proud of. I think we're the only big industry that's stepped up to that in the telecom space. Chairman Janikowski talks about it all the time. We have huge penetration on availability of broadband. We have a somewhat surprisingly smaller adoption rate, meaning people who have it available don't get it. And it turns out the reason isn't just price. It's not even actually the most significant reason. It has to do with digital literacy, comfort with the medium. And so we've signed up for Cable to Compete and to lead an initiative to provide low-cost broadband access to low-income families across the country. The entire cable industry is working on this collectively with the FCC and with the Cable Connect enterprise. And hopefully we'll bring together three critical pieces: low-cost computer with digital literacy training, and a low-cost broadband network. And that bringing those things together as best we can will help overcome this, drive up adoption, and get the country better positioned for the information age.
How do you determine who is low income, who qualifies?
We're using the well-recognized free lunch program as the metric in these communities. So, these are data sets that we can assess and evaluate, and we use as a criteria for eligibility. So if you're in a family that's eligible for free lunch, you will be available for this program. Now in the startup phase, we're taking an even easier path to that, which is if you are at a school, if your child goes to a school, 75% eligible for school lunch we use as a benchmark, we're going to serve anyone at that school. So you may not be on school lunch, you're above that 75%, but we're not going to make that distinction. You're going to get the advantage of that program as well, at least in the startup phase.
If we could, just for a second, return to policy.
Yeah.
The Verizon Spectrum company deal is being looked at by the FCC. Was there talk here at the cable show about that issue?
Honestly, not much. I think this is one of those things where, as we used to say in the court system, the matter's submitted. I mean, the companies have announced all they're going to announce. They've submitted the deal for review by the appropriate authorities, and we're in that period where that's underway. We had a lot of government officials here. No one seemed interested in talking about it because they wouldn't anyway. so I don't ask them about it. I used to live on that side. You can ask me all day about a pending transaction. You'll get no answer. But it hasn't been the central story of the business or the show at the moment. And I've been even somewhat surprised that it's not been a big topic here.
And finally, as a former chair of the FCC, give us, if you would, your long view of Light Squared and Phil Falcone and how that spectrum deal fell apart at the FCC.
You know, I'm not sure I'm really particularly qualified to answer very thoughtfully. I don't know the details. I wasn't involved in the deal in any way. They're not members of mine. I don't know all the complexity of what they had to agree to. I can only say I've seen many attempts at models like that. I've always been a little bit, when I was in the investment world for a while, skeptical of that approach. But I always admire someone willing to put a lot of capital behind taking the risk. But you know, the number of very serious hoops that had to go right for you were pretty formidable. I knew where that spectrum was. I knew the GPS fight. I'd been through that before in my life. You know, I knew you're going to get Caterpillar coming out of the woodwork. You're going to get military guys who wear stars on their shoulder. You know, concerned about. You know, that's a lot to overcome, I think. Plus, you're in satellite spectrum territory. You know, I suppose I was always skeptical that one could overcome all of those hurdles and then turn around and build out a nationwide network at a very, very fast speed. But you know, let me stop there and just sort of again reiterate what the heck do I know? I'm not part of it, and don't know Phil Falcone all that well, and don't know the details, and so. But they're smart people, and they must have seen something that they thought had promise.
Michael Powell is President and CEO of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and we are in Boston at the 2012 Cable Show. Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Glenn, Britt, at an earlier session here at the Cable Show in Boston, you mentioned that cable set-top boxes may go away. I wonder if you could explain that.
Sure. The set-top box actually performs 2 or 3 functions that we need because traditional TVs didn't have that capability. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Our digital signals are encrypted so that they're not stolen. So we need a device that is able to decrypt them. Traditional TVs don't have that capability. In order to display a program guide, you need some computing intelligence and also the ability to communicate in 2 directions, two-way radio it's called. Traditional TVs don't have that. So that's why we have a set-top in essence to allow us to display our services in the home that otherwise could not be displayed. What's beginning to happen is that consumers are buying devices that have intelligence in them. That could be a smart TV, it could be an iPad, or it could be an iPhone, it could be a Roku box, it could be an Xbox, there's any number of these things. And those devices have computing power and they can talk two-way. So that will enable us over time to eliminate the separate set-top box. So that means that the consumer will save that money and I think have a much better experience, you know, including where do you put the set-top box, and you have the big screen TV on the wall and it's clunky, what have you. But as long as people have older TVs, we're going to have some set-top devices. So it's going to take a long time, but that's directionally where it's going.
Time frame?
Well, today, if you have an iPad in your house and our cable system, you can watch TV on it. There's nothing attached to it. It's over Wi-Fi. So you can do it today. But I think realistically, to be in a world where there are no set-top boxes, that'll come only after everybody throws all their old stuff away. That's probably over a 5 or 10 year period. Some houses much sooner, but for everybody it's a long time.
Mr. Britt, you also you mentioned Wi-Fi. there's a new agreement among some of the larger cable companies, such as Time Warner. What is that agreement?
We're agreeing to create a common standard so that we can authenticate our customers. So if you're a broadband customer, you could use our Wi-Fi, and I'll talk about where we're building that. And you could also use another cable operator's Wi-Fi. So we're going to be able to roam across cable operators. So for example, let's say you're a Time Warner broadband customer in Manhattan. If you went to Philadelphia, which is a Comcast market, you would be able to use Comcast Wi-Fi. Now, where we're building this is in areas where people congregate. So Wi-Fi is not a substitute for the existing cellular network. It's not useful if you're driving your car at 70 miles an hour or 55 if you're following the speed limit. But a lot of data usage in tablets is done over Wi-Fi now. So the idea is to make that available as part of our service. And when you're in and around town and doing things people do, you can use that Wi-Fi. Our company, Time Warner Cable, is starting in Los Angeles, a little bit in New York, and a little bit in Charlotte this year. But we're really focusing on going very deeply in Los Angeles. That's this year's focus. And we'll go from there.
Speaking of iPads and other devices, tablets, etc., even though it's still reported that 98% of us are sitting in our living rooms watching the big TV, there seems to be a lot of energy toward TV everywhere and being able to get TV on different devices. Where's the business model for that if people are still sitting in their living rooms?
What we think is that people, consumers, want something that we call the 4 N's, A-N-Y-S. So what are the 4 N's? The first one is that people want access to any content. So that may be content made professionally by some of the people exhibiting at this cable show. It may be amateur video on YouTube. It could, a video I made in my house, could be anything. But people want access to any content. They don't want to be limited. So that's the first NE. The second NE is people want to access that on any screen. So all sorts of things are TVs today, not just the big screen on the wall, but an iPad is a TV, an iPhone is a TV, an Android tablet is a TV. It goes on and on. Anything with a display can be a TV. So they want access to any video on any device. That's the second NE. The third NE is anytime. So people want to be able to watch their content on their schedule. There's a phenomenon now, just as an example, called binge viewing. Rather than waiting for the one episode of show a week, and then the summer you have to wait till the next season. People are sitting down and consuming all the shows in a series all at once. So that's choice, it's convenience, it's on my time, not somebody else's time. So that's the third NE. The fourth NE is any place. So wherever I am, I want this. And we think that people like the idea of paying for this all in one subscription. So you pay once a month. You know what it costs. It's not pay-per-view, and you don't know how big your bill is going to be. You buy it in subscription form, and it's there. So that's what we're seeking to offer. It's very difficult to assemble the licenses and copyright permission to do this. The technology is available. It needs to be glued together in the right way, but it's available. But that's where we think we're going.
There was a quote attributed to you, Glenn Britt. Distributors have to remember that technology is a complement to services, not a replacement.
I said that?
That was attributed to you in an article in Multi-Channel News.
Okay, well, I believe that. I think that, and actually if you look at our new branding campaign, it very much builds on that. So we are as a business, we're a middleman and we're an enabler, we're a retailer, we're all those things. So we don't, if we're talking about television, we by and large don't create television. I mean, we do have news channels and some other things, but mostly we're buying that from other people who create it. And actually, for that matter, most of the networks buy it from other people who create it. C-SPAN being an exception. C-SPAN creates its own content. What we do is enable it, so we're selling it to people in a retail package, and we're delivering it to people, and we want to make that as easy and as convenient as possible. So our new ad campaign is enjoy better, and you can fill in the blank. So enjoy C-SPAN better, enjoy NBC better. So that's what we do. And so I think that's what was reflected in that quote you gave me.
As chairman of Time Warner Cable, how much of your day, how much of your time is spent worrying, thinking about, working on issues that regulators and legislators care about in Washington? We talk a lot on this program about privacy, piracy, cybersecurity, net neutrality, net management, etc. What about you?
I think realistically we are in the infrastructure business, and we sell services that are used by a lot of people many hours of the day. And that means we're important, and that means we're regulated. And that's just part of this business. We're regulated at the federal level, at the state level, and to some extent at the city level. And that means we have to pay attention to issues that regulators care about in our space. And so, yes, that takes a lot of my time. I think we continually need to explain to both consumers and regulators what we're doing, why we're doing it, so that we can tell our story, so that when there are issues, they can be dealt with in a context where people understand all of the ins and outs, if I can use that. So I actually spend a lot of my time on this kind of stuff.
Recently, speaking of regulation and local issues, mayors of several New York cities wrote a letter to the FCC against the cable companies and Verizon Spectrum deal. They're saying that'll prevent Fios from coming into and competition from coming into their cities. How important is that Spectrum deal to cable companies?
So let me explain what we're doing. First of all, this deal is with Verizon Wireless, not the Verizon Wireline company. And Verizon Wireless is actually a separate entity that is 55% owned by Verizon, 45% owned by Vodafone, which is an international wireless company. I believe it's the biggest wireless company in the world, but I may be wrong. And it doesn't operate in the US except through Verizon Wireless. So our deal is with Verizon Wireless, not with the wireline company. And the deal is to sell Spectrum to Verizon Wireless, and also to let them sell our wireline services as an agent, which means that we set the price and the products. They could sell it. It's not any different than Best Buy selling our services, which they do, by the way. And we in turn could sell the Verizon wireline products. They, I assume, have a similar relationship with Verizon Wireline. Again, this is wireless, so I may have just confused that, but we can sell the Verizon Wireless products. That's what I meant to say. So I think it's interesting. We used to be part of Time Warner, and we're a separate company now. Time Warner has many divisions, and nobody was ever uncomfortable with the fact that one division would have a relationship with a third party, another division might compete with that third party. It happens in American business all the time. And so here we have a partial owned entity that has the name Verizon Wireless, doing a deal with some cable companies. At the same time, we compete with Verizon Wireline. Again, it happens in business all the time, and I think Verizon Wireline is going to do whatever they do with Fios. It's unaffected by this deal.
And finally, Mr. Britt, it's an election year, so Congress is not terribly active at this point, but do you expect or do you anticipate, would you like to see Congress take on telecom reform after the 2012 election?
As the CEO of a company in this industry, I would say yes, because the last two acts of Congress that affected this industry were one in 1992, which pretty much changed the television landscape, and that's now 20 years old, and an awful lot has changed since then. Then in 1996, there was another act that mainly dealt with long distance and local telephone, but it did change some aspects of the television part too. So that wasn't quite 20 years ago, but it was a long time. So I think given the changes in technology and the internet, which was barely even thought of back then, it is appropriate, and I do hope Congress takes this up. As a citizen, I think it has to be put in context, and there's many issues in the world, and they may be more important than this. So I think it's all got to be done in due course, but I would say 20 years is a long time to live with regulations when the world changes as fast as ours has. So yes, I hope they take it up.
What's your background? How long have you been with Time Warner?
I've been involved in the cable business for 40 years, and all with Time Warner or one of its predecessor companies. I started with a company called Time Incorporated, which was a magazine company that was getting into the television business 40 years ago, and then later it merged with Warner to form Time Warner, and of course the cable company we spun out a few years ago, so we're now a separate company.
And this is The Communicators, and we've been talking with Glenn Britt, who is Chairman and CEO of Time Warner Cable. And you've been watching The Communicators on C-SPAN. This is our weekly look at telecommunications policies and issues. Next week, our coverage from Boston and the 2012 cable show continues. We'll be talking with two Federal Trade Commission officials. Thanks for being with us. You can watch any of the previous Communicators at cspan.org.
Join us